welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Kanell. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at CBS Sports Network. Fired up to join you here on December 31st. That's right, New Year's Eve. We are going to get you set for all of the college football playoff quarterfinal action. And before we also look ahead to the future of the college football playoff, I got to say, Danny Kanell, thank you so much for taking some time to join us here from what's that, scenic Utah right there?
This is scenic Utah right here. Can you see it's not quite like the smoke that's blowing when you watch a football game at Lambeau Field, but there is some breath, there's some fumes coming out here because it is about 12 degrees right here on the balcony, so I don't disturb the kids that are sleeping right now.
Yeah, tell the girls to wake up. It's time to ski. Right. Come on now. Yeah, let's go. All right. Before we get into these games, I do think that it's interesting to sort of take stock of the college football playoff before the quarterfinals get set. There are a lot of opinions, a lot of reaction after we saw some 4 blowouts in the first round. Then that is followed up by a quarterfinal round that has 2 games, which we will break down, that both have double-digit spreads. And we know that all of the commissioners and all the college football playoff decision makers later in January around the national championship game will be getting together to be able to discuss any kind of changes that might be ahead in the future. Now, nothing is certain for 2026 and beyond. Those decisions still need to be made. But Tom, there is some reporting right now from Ross Dellinger, from Brett McMurphy, and many others that there is starting to be some movement for maybe even trying to change the format for 2025. Doing so would take unanimous approval from all the stakeholders involved. So when you're looking at some of these, especially as it pertains to seeding, what stands out to you as something that you would encourage these conference commissioners to agree to?
Well, first of all, I'm happy that they're already considering it instead of just letting it play out for a few more years, hoping things improve. So the fact that we're already hearing that they're ready to make changes, to me, is a good sign. And I think the primary change that needs to be made, that I think is already clear and has been clear for weeks, is you have to change the format of the seeding. You cannot just give conference champions the automatic bye, the top 4 ranked teams, because you end up seeing what we've seen this year, where Boise State and Arizona State both get byes for winning their conferences, and good for them. They deserved it based on the format, and they had great seasons, but it's setting us up to where this quarterfinal round has 2 games with double-digit spreads, and as we saw in the first round, we had nothing but blowouts, as a lot of teams that probably would have had byes if we just did it off of regular seeding were forced to play teams that were at the bottom of the bracket getting in. So you're never going to get rid of blowouts in any playoff format. It happens in the professional leagues every single year as well, but you can at least minimize the chances of them happening so often as we saw in the first round by just properly seeding these teams and putting games together that are more, between teams that are more properly aligned and more equal as far as the ability and the talent levels on the roster. So I think that's definitely a change that they should consider making. And I think another change, which I don't know if they will consider it this early, but maybe in future formats, more home games. No neutral sites. Let's save the neutral sites to the championship game and play every game on campus, because then you truly are rewarding teams for having good seasons by giving them the home field advantage every week.
Chip, you said it requires unanimous decision, right? Has anybody heard from anybody that covers the sport or that's passionate about the sport outside of maybe the Mountain West commissioner and Boise State who has said, yeah, this looks good. Like, let's just keep it the same. Like, it doesn't make any sense the way it was. And we've documented on here a bunch. Like, if you want to fix it, listen to some of our Cover 3 episodes that we've done on suggestions like Tom was just talking about. Chip, you mentioned one time possibly having the home games, the second round, the quarterfinals, and making the first round a neutral field. All of those are great suggestions, but I think the one thing that everybody recognizes is change is necessary. And the outcry that have been from so many people, and I was one who was like, let's see how it plays out, and I still want to do that. But after the first weekend and seeing some of those lopsided matchups, I think it's blatantly, it's like so obvious to everyone in charge that they need to make a change to at least give us a better product that is more entertaining, that's more equitable for the number 1 seed like Oregon. Because if you do have a perfect regular season, which they had, you should be giving some advantage in the postseason play. Instead, they have one of the toughest roads to get a national championship maybe that we've seen in the history of college football because of what they have to go through.
Yeah, bracket luck is one thing when results happen that are unexpected, but the path being so slanted one way and against another team, when Oregon wins the Big Ten championship and gets a tougher path than Penn State, which loses the Big Ten championship and gets a potentially easier path, those are things that I think have all illuminated why you might want to take a look at the seeding aspects of this. Danny, what about any other discussions that might come out of trying to plan what could happen moving forward? Because I'll just tell you, I don't expect them to do any expansion. I don't expect them to talk about automatic qualifiers for next season. But all those things we know are on the table for discussion for 2026 and beyond. As you've looked at some of these proposals and thought about ways that this bracket might evolve further, what stands out as a good idea to you?
Well, one thing that's driven me nuts, Chip, is when we've talked about expansion for so long, and when they announced the 12-team playoff, remember we had to wait 2 or 3 years before we actually got there. I would have hoped that maybe they'd consider going to what they eventually are going to anyway. Now, some of that dust has to settle with conference realignment as that goes before they can go that far, but that would be one for me. If you're going to go to 14, if you're going to go to 16, let's get there sooner rather than later, although I don't know if that's going to happen this time around. I'm just glad they're going to make some changes after year one. Instead of knowing it's broken and watching it for 2 years and then doing it, let's do it now, because historically we have not done things quickly in our sport that we love. It's taken a long time. So at least now we're going to make some changes now.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, like, expansion is going to come. There's just simply no way that they're going to sit at 12 teams. And I think, honestly, one of the things we saw this season that will spur expansion even quicker is that the SEC only got 3 teams in. And we know that Greg Sankey and that conference are not happy with the current situation where they only had 3 teams get into the field while they had to see teams from what they would deem to be lower conferences getting spots ahead of them. So I think we're going to see expansion. I don't know if I'm excited about the idea of the Big Ten and the SEC, playing their cards right and, using their power and their financial might to kind of scare teams in the other conferences, saying, well, we can break off and do our own thing, and using that to try to get more automatic spots for the Big Ten and for the SEC. I do think that is the reality that we're facing in the future. But I think more than anything, with the format, what I really am concerned about is what I mentioned earlier. I want home games. I don't want neutral sites for these games until you get to the very end. When you look at the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, every other sport, they're not playing the postseason at neutral sites until they get to the very end. Every other game is played on at home or on site because it rewards teams for getting it. And I do think that, again, reseeding teams based on where they are in the poll, not based on where they were as conference champions. Because the one thing about our current format and the 12-team, it was created while there were still 5 power conferences. The Pac-12 is gone now. So this format makes no sense in the current landscape. So that's one thing, and I think that's part of the reason why they're already ready to change it.
Okay, one last thing. We could just do a snap call because I want to at least pitch this, and we will discuss this obviously further. But the 4-4-2-2-1-1 hike, which of course is 4 for the Big Ten, 4 for the SEC, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12, 1 guaranteed conference champion from another conference, and then 1 other spot, which we can call Notre Dame or the Marcus Freeman hot seat, because if Notre Dame can't make that 1 spot in a 14-team playoff, let's just say that it wasn't a great season for the Fighting Irish. Tom, the 4-4-2-2-1-1, do you like that if that ends up being something that they discuss for 2026 and beyond?
No, I hate that idea because, the Big Ten and the SEC are the 2 best conferences in the country, but the fact that they'll be guaranteed 4 spots, there are going to be some seasons where each league doesn't have 4 teams worthy of being in the playoff. We saw it this year. The SEC did not have 4 teams that deserved to be in the playoff. So to give them 4 guaranteed spots, to me, seems ridiculous, both for them and the Big Ten. And I could also argue that there are going to be years where the Big 12 and the ACC don't have 2 teams deserving of the spot. Based on what we've seen from the ACC so far in the bowl season, it's pretty hard to argue against what's happened in that league this year. But I like the idea of having to earn it and having some sort of set guideline and standard. I just hate guaranteeing spots based on conference affiliation. I think that's just going to lead to more problems in the long run, and it'll probably just lead to a future where the Big Ten and the SEC break apart.
But I would rather know, like if you're Jim Phillips, who did, and him and Brett Yormark did turn down the 3-3-2-2-1 model, right, Chip? The one that was supposed to be for the 12 teams. because they thought it was unfair. After we've seen things unfold and see how, you'd only get one team if you're the Big 12 in, wouldn't you want to know, like, you're going to get screwed either way because you're not a super conference. You're not the Big 10 and you're not the SEC. So if you're going to get screwed, at least know how you're going to get screwed going in. And then if you do have a team that's maybe that third team that's on the cusp, potentially get maybe a Miami Hurricanes this year, if there are 4 teams from the Big 10 and the SEC, maybe you can snatch up that third spot. So I think you better get used to it, Tom. I don't know how I feel about it yet, but I would say it's probably the one that's coming sooner rather than later.
I don't like it because then it just sends everyone into their silos. And what we have seen with college football is people getting excited about the fact that this is a sport where everyone can get involved. We've got the information, we've got the access to be able to be a fan in one conference and be paying attention to what's going on in another and look at how these teams stack up against each other. I mean, the rankings would be useless in 4-4-2-2-1-1. Trying to even consider how these teams stack up against each other and grabbing at data points and having these debates would be useless in 4-4-2-2-1-1. And we have so much conversation on the Cover 3 podcast, stacking these teams up against each other from across conferences. And what would we even talk about if we had that situation? So who knows? All right, boys. Coming up on the other side, we'll get into the games, beginning with Sugar Bowl matchup that throws all the way back to a Sugar Bowl that decided a national champion. We'll get into Georgia, Notre Dame, and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live from CBS Sports Network. Danny Kanell from Utah and Tom Fornelli from the mountains again. It's amazing the kind of time travel that he can figure out right here.
You can't see his breath, though. You can't see his breath. Yeah, you can't fake that.
He doesn't have that 13. Look at that. Just a master of time and space. All right, Mr. Time Traveler. Tom, so much was made of Carson Beck's injury and what it's going to mean for Gunnar Stockton, that as we sit here the day before the Sugar Bowl between Notre Dame and Georgia, I feel like there is an injury development that we have not discussed as much, and definitely the public at large has not discussed as much, because shortly after their win against Indiana, Marcus Freeman did confirm that defensive lineman Riley Mills is done for the rest of the season. You had mentioned in the Instant Reaction podcast how much fun it was watching him dominate in that game. And so as we start to look at what it's going to be like when Notre Dame is on defense, going up against, yes, a Georgia offense quarterbacked by Gunnar Stockton, but still an offensive line that is among the best in the country, a run game which they're going to be very committed to. How do you handicap how the absence of Riley Mills changes Notre Dame's defensive approach?
I don't know that it changes the approach much. I think more than anything, it could change the effectiveness of this Notre Dame defense, which on the season has been one of the best defenses in the country all year long. And Riley Mills was a big part of that because he has been the team's leader in tackles for loss. He's one of the team's best pass rushers, and he does it from the defensive tackle spot. So he's getting pressure on the interior, which is something that no quarterback really wants to deal with. But especially if you've got Gunnar Stockton out there making his first career start, he's going to be under a lot of pressure to begin with. If he's got a defensive tackle barreling down on him from the A-gap, that could lead to bigger problems for the Georgia offense, not just in the run game where he's also a disruptor. So I think it's a big loss, and I think that it's one of those things that maybe, like you said, is not getting the same kind of headlines because of the Carson Beck injury, but it will have an impact. The question is, how much of an impact will it be? Because this is a Georgia team that, even when it had a healthy Carson Beck all season long, was not very effective at running the ball. Part of that was Tate Ratledge being injured and missing so much of the season. That impacted the interior of their offensive line. But even when he's been healthy and the offensive line has been at full strength, they've really not been able to get much of a great run game going, particularly when it comes to big runs and explosive runs. It's been really difficult for them. So I think maybe Mills being out kind of gives Georgia at least a better chance to be able to run the ball. And I think that obviously without their starting quarterback, they're going to have to be able to run the ball to win this game.
This is a huge loss. I mean, and it's totally been overshadowed because we've talked so much about Gunnar Stockton, and losing a quarterback is different than losing a defensive tackle. But this is one of the most productive defensive players for Notre Dame, leads the team in sacks, leads the team in tackles for loss, and even more so than the stat column from the interior presence, specifically against the run. Like, this is where I do wonder if Al Golden, like, you don't want to have to send a house. That should be a luxury, right? When you have to get up there to bring more bodies in the box to stop the run. Well, if you're back up, if there's a significant drop off and you're getting run on, then all of a sudden you have to bring more guys in the box and you bring up more linebackers, safety to get involved. And then all of a sudden that opens up things in the pass game and opens just play action pass and a whole lot more. So I think this is a significant loss for Notre Dame that, you're right, Chip, has not been, talked about very much, but this is a huge loss because, and again, another positional one. And I know Notre Dame has a ton of 4 and 5 stars and they'll plug in somebody who's really talented, but just from the experience and then a depth standpoint, what happens if you start seeing another injury occur? Then you're starting to get further and further down the depth chart. So I do think it's a significant blow to Notre Dame.
Yeah, Howard Cross, not the same position, but he dealt with some injury issues and that they've had to really dip into that depth all throughout the season. So it's going to be a group that will continue to be tested in this matchup. Danny, what about the Georgia defense side of this? Because Riley Leonard has done a really phenomenal job building upon each week. And it seems like here in the last month or so of the season, he's got full command of this offense. He's got Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love. I mean, they do such a good job of keeping defenses on their heels with all the different ways that they can pick you apart from the offensive backfield. We go back and look at what Georgia has done this year. Mobile quarterbacks at times have given them trouble. The times where they have been feasting the most, I think about the Texas games. Quinn Ewers can move, but he's no Jalen Milroe. He is no Haynes King. So when you're thinking about Riley Leonard and how that matchup is going to go against Georgia's defense, do the Bulldogs have what it takes to be able to keep that group in check?
They're going to have to. I mean, that's the number one task, I think, is to take away Riley Leonard's legs. It has to be. And you mentioned Howard Cross for the Notre Dame defense, who doesn't play inside, he plays on the outside, but actually played with his dad. His dad was my tight end for the New York Giants my rookie year when I came in there. He's a great dude. But for this defense, so Riley Leonard, you mentioned some of those other quarterbacks. I do think that Haynes King is a better passer. Milroe's probably equivalent, but it's a different style. Like, Milroe hits you in the deep ball. That's an area where I think Riley Leonard struggles somewhat. And I do think he showed me a really impressive ability to know where to go with the football against Indiana last week, because that was a question mark for me. It was one of the reasons I took under his passing total in the props. Remember, I took 185 or 192, whatever it was, went under, and he went over 200 yards. If Riley Leonard is that efficient as a passer, Notre Dame's going to win this game, and I don't by a touchdown or more. They've got to make him uncomfortable to stay in the pocket and take away some of those intermediate throws and force him to throw outside and down the field. If they do that, that's where I think Georgia has success against him. And you mentioned the mobile quarterbacks. It's not just Georgia that struggles against him. That's why the evolution of the game has turned, even in the NFL, you have to be able to run the football. But when you have a special type of athlete like Riley Leonard or like a Jalen Milroe, that's when it creates real fits for a defense. And I'm sure that's Kirby Smart's biggest nightmare, is Riley Leonard out there rushing for 80, 90, 100 yards, because you'll know that'll mean it's a really long day for their defense.
Yeah, I mean, running quarterbacks are kryptonite for every defense. Let's go back to Alabama under Nick Saban, during the dynasty years. Who were the quarterbacks that gave Nick Saban's defense the most problems? The guys who could use their legs to extend drives. Where does Kirby Smart come from? He comes from Nick Saban's tree. They run a very similar defense, and we've seen it this year, like we touched upon. They have played 3 games against teams with very mobile quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe rushed for 113 yards on 18 carries. Hayden King rushed for 110 on 25. And before he got hurt early in the game, DJ Lagway had already rushed for 20 yards on 4 carries before he got knocked out of the game, and that one really changed. So Riley Leonard can have an impact for Notre Dame in this game. Of course, he is not the passer that I think, like you touched on, Danny, that I think Jalen Milroe is, or that Hayden King is at least proven having a semblance of doing. I think Riley Leonard is not what someone you're looking at to push things vertically, even if we saw him doing it more against Indiana. So it'll be interesting to see how Georgia is able to counter that. But I think right now, just going into this game with Riley Leonard, with Jeremiah Love, you have to have more confidence in this Notre Dame offense at this point than you do Georgia's, because they are missing Carson Beck. And on the season as a whole, Georgia's offense has not been explosive. I touched on it earlier. What they rely on all year to score points is field position, staying ahead of schedule, and finishing in the red zone. They could probably still control field position with their defense. They might be able to finish in the red zone as well. but can they stay on schedule with Gunnar Stockton instead of Carson Beck? That's what remains to be seen. And I think that when you look at this matchup as a whole, that is going to be the determining factor. How well Stockton and this offense play on first and second down to keep them out of third and long situations. Because on the flip side, Notre Dame, also horrible in third and long situations. They've been one of the worst in the country all season long at that. So first and second downs for both of these offenses will decide this game.
I know that this is a good game because we are like dictating basically the basics of football. Win early downs, win in the red zone, and that's because these are two good teams. We talk about the quarterfinal matchups that are mismatches. This is not that. These have been two of the best teams all year. They're playing with national championship stakes in the same bowl game where Georgia beat Notre Dame for a national championship a couple decades ago. New Orleans. We'll see. All right, 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time is the scheduled kickoff for that one. Now, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention to Big Ten on Big Ten in the Rose Bowl. It's the rematch of the Ducks and the Bucks. We'll get into all that and more next. So, Danny, I ask you, did Ohio State find a new gear in the win against Tennessee? Or should we put some blame at Tennessee's feet for allowing Ohio State to just kind of run roughshod on both sides of the ball?
Maybe a little bit of both. That was a huge moment. We saw Ohio State backs against the wall. We saw cold weather. We talked a lot about home field advantage. I think that was on display. And then you saw just the game get sideways because Tennessee ran into an absolute buzzsaw. Here's the thing about Ohio State. We've known they've had that gear. They just haven't been using it very much. They've shown flashes of it, but that was the most complete game they've played so far and the best game they've played so far. And that's why I firmly believe, if that's the version you get of Ohio State, not only are they going to beat Oregon, they're going to go on to win the national championship. But I don't know if we're going to get it because this team is better than Tennessee and they will be challenged more, just like they were in the first matchup when they went to Eugene and came up just short. But the team that I trust more is Oregon because they've been more consistent all year long. What version of Will Howard are we going to get? What version of the defense are we going to get for Ohio State? So the question marks for me are around Ohio State, whereas with Oregon, I feel like I trust that I know what I'm going to get from Oregon, and that's a pretty stellar performance. And I don't know if I'm going to get that from Ohio State. We might, and I hope we do, but I'm not 100% certain we're going to get that.
Yeah, you look at Ohio State in that Tennessee game, and obviously we focus on the offense because they had a spectacular evening. But to me, what stood out was the defense. The pass rush was there. And I think when Ohio State is operating at max capacity, it's because it has a pass rush. And when I go back to the first meeting of these two earlier in the season, Ohio State's pass rush was non-existent for the most part in that game. And frankly, so was Oregon's. When you rewatch it, Oregon didn't have Jordan Birch in that game. And that was back when Ohio State's offensive line was still at full strength. But there was only one sack in the game. Neither of those defensive lines or pass rushes were winning a whole lot of battles, which is how you end up with the final score you did where both teams were able to, make a bunch of plays in the passing game. So what will we see in this one now that Ohio State's offensive line is not at full strength, but it has gotten better as they've been able to work more games to get more experience with their backups in there? What will Oregon's defensive line look like with Jordan Birch being back in there? Will we see more of a pass rush and will that impact it? Because as I've talked about on the show all week, I went back, I rewatched this game. I watched the tape of both offenses, and they scored a lot of points. They also left a lot of points on the board. There were missed throws. Neither team was really able to run the ball super effectively, particularly Ohio State, who really struggled on the ground in that game. If they're able to get their run game going, how will that impact this one? Because as we saw in the Big Ten championship, and we've seen all year for the most part, Oregon's run defense is not spectacular. That performance against Ohio State, I would probably mark as the best one they've had all season long. Can they do it again? Because if they don't, I think it's going to be much more difficult to stop these Buckeyes because we see what they're capable of with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka in the passing game. Will Howard, if he hits those throws, good luck. And if they're able to run the ball, well, then you're doubly screwed because now you've got to pick your poison. Which one do you want to stop? It's very difficult to do. And on the other side, can these Ohio State corners cover the Oregon receivers? Because, man, they didn't do a very good job of it in the first game. But as I said, there was no pass rush. So Dylan Gabriel was able to just stand there and wait for his guys to get open and then just hit them in stride for touchdowns. So this is going to be a very, very good game. And I agree with you, Danny. Like, when both of these teams are playing at their best, they're the best teams in the country. I don't really think anybody else comes close, to be honest with you. And I feel like the winner of this game has a very good chance of winning the whole thing. So this is going to be an incredible game. I think it's going to look a lot like the first one, except maybe higher scoring. I do not think either one of these teams is capable of pulling away from the other. It should be a classic.
Tom, which quarterback do you trust more in this matchup?
Dylan Gabriel, which I don't say that as a knock on Will Howard, even though it was a very easy question to answer. It's just, I think when you look at Dylan Gabriel, you look at the experience. He's been in big games like this before. He's been at Oklahoma. Now that he's been at Oregon, he's been in a Big Ten championship. He's faced Ohio State. Will Howard had a very good career. He was at Kansas State. He was in a Big 12 championship. He did win it, but week to week, he was not facing the kind of competition that Dylan Gabriel has faced this year and in his entire career. So I think when you look at the passer, Dylan Gabriel is much more reliable. Even if he does not have prototypical NFL size or prototypical NFL arm strength, he's very accurate. He knows the offense inside and out. There's nothing a defense can throw at him that is going to confuse him pre-snap. He understands what he's seeing. He understands where the ball is supposed to go. And I still think Will Howard, for as experienced as he is, once you kind of, get collapse the pocket and get pressure on him, he gets flustered. Dylan Gabriel doesn't. So I think because of that, I give Gabriel the edge.
Oh, I think it's an easy answer too. I'm with Dylan Gabriel, and I don't think that should be a knock at all to Will Howard. Like, he's proven he already went toe to toe in Dylan Gabriel's stadium out there at Autzen and maybe outplayed him. You could argue, looking at some of the numbers, just came up a second short on the clock. So, and when you say trust, it's the perfect word, because I think Dylan Gabriel not only is the most trustworthy quarterback in this game, he's been the most trustworthy quarterback of the entire country, where he's been with the football. And it makes a lot of sense because he's seen more action than anybody in the history of the sport. So he's seen every defense that you could throw at him. He's been through the ups. He's been through the downs. He's had pick sixes that have been returned and, put him in a game where you need to bring him back, like it was in the Red River game last year when he was with Oklahoma and marched him right down the field. He's been there and seen so much. And Will Howard has been there too. He's got a Big 12 championship under his belt at Kansas State. But this year, and maybe some of it's both playing in new systems, but Will Howard's been a little bit bumpier. He had the 2 picks versus Michigan. He had the pick 6 against Penn State on the road, which I love that he bounced back. It didn't really matter, didn't affect him, which is great. So I think these are 2 great quarterbacks going toe to toe. I think it's going to be an outstanding performance, but I think you have to give the edge to Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, Danny, I'm glad you saw through that one, because when I said trust, I was imagining a game where ultimately you're going to ask one of these quarterbacks, one of these offenses, we got to go get a score. And maybe it's a situation where you've got a lead and you just need to extend that lead, or maybe cut into a lead, or maybe go take the lead. But in a game where, as we have detailed here, the offenses might have advantages against both of these defenses, both of these quarterbacks at different points in the game are going to be asked to go and try and win the Rose Bowl and advance to the semifinal. To which I ask Danny, who wins this game? How do you see it playing out? You don't need to give me a score, but a winner and just sort of the way you think we get there.
I think it's going to be a great game. I think it's probably similar to the last one as far as points. I'm not quite as sure as Tom Fornelli is that it's going to go over that total, but I think it's going to be right around it. And I think as much as we're talking about these quarterbacks, I do think it'll come down to a mistake or two that's made either by the quarterback, an interception here or there that costs them. Maybe it's a fumble, it's a turnover, something like that determines the outcome. But I'm going to go with the team that's been close to perfect all season long. I'm going to ride with the Ducks. I feel like this season has been sort of a coronation of Dan Lanning as one of the best coaches in college football. I picked him in the preseason. I'm not going to step away from that now, but I think this is going to be a spectacular matchup.
Oddly enough, I'm more confident in the final score than I am the winner. Like, I think the final score is going to be roughly 41-38. Whether it's Ohio State or Oregon with the 41, I'm not sure, but I am leaning slightly towards Oregon just because I think that, again, when they're at their best, Ohio State is incredible. It's just we have seen too many times this year where they're not at their best. Whereas Oregon as a team on the season started off slowly as they were dealing with injuries along their offensive line. But as the year has gone on and as Dylan Gabriel has gotten more and more comfortable in this offense, they just get better every single week. So based on that trend, I think Oregon will be the more likely to win the game, but I really do think that both of these teams are very capable of winning it, and it's going to come down to one or two plays and maybe just the bounce of a fumble, which arms it ends up in.
Or maybe, and I'm literally just coming up with this right on air, maybe it's like a Caleb Downs punt return. Totally. You know, like you're starting to look at all the different X factors that you could have right here. A special team. Danny, you were talking about the mistake. You know, the special teams play. Who's going to flip the field? Who's going to muff a punt? I'm right there. This is going to be awesome. I do have Oregon winning this football game, but I would be unsurprised. Yeah, Danny?
Most coaches, if you talk to most coaches, especially in college football, most games are lost more than they're won. That's why I brought up the mistake. Like it's usually the way the game unfolds. That's why they preach, hang on to the football, make the right decision, make the right read, because in college football, a lot of times the games are lost more so than they're won.
Buddy, there's some interesting things going on in bowl games right now. That's a tease. Catch me right. And coming up on the other side, we are going to continue our previews of the college football playoff quarterfinals with a look at the Peach Bowl, where the SEC runner-up Texas takes on the Big 12 champion Arizona State. Keys to the game and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. That's Danny Kanell. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson, and we turn our attention to the game on New Year's Day that will get our quarterfinal triple header started. We go to Atlanta, to the Peach Bowl, where Texas has advanced after winning their first round game against Clemson, and they will be taking on the Big 12 champion Arizona State. It's a 4-on-5 matchup in our very first 12-team bracket in the college football playoff. And so, Tom, I'll start with you. For Arizona State, what were the strengths that you think helped them not only win the Big 12, but can carry over into this matchup against the Longhorns?
The ability to score points, because I think defensively they did a pretty good job in the Big 12. But I think more than anything, this is a team that relied on its offense to control games. They relied on Cam Scatterbo to run the ball and just kind of serve as something of a battering ram to just wear teams down and churn clock and control the tempo of games to make sure that their defense, which has been good statistically, but it's because they weren't really on the field all that often, was able to stay off the field and keep them in these games. And I think another part that you have to look at, like Cam Scatterbo gets all the attention, and deservedly so. He ended up getting Heisman votes. But I think what really took this team to the next level was the ascendance of Sam Leavitt in the second half of the season. Because if you look, before he was injured in the first 6 games, he had a passer rating of 135.8. He was completing only 59% of his passes with 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and 7.7 yards per attempt. Then he misses the Cincinnati game. He comes back, and in the last 6 games, his numbers have all skyrocketed. He's got a passer rating of 183.3. He's completing 67% of his passes, 16 touchdowns to only 1 interception, and he's up to 9.8 yards per attempt. And more importantly, it's not because the schedule changed. If you could look at Arizona State's schedule this year, you could say the 3 toughest teams they played were Kansas State, BYU, and Iowa State as far as defenses. Those are 3 teams where Sam Leavitt has had some of his best games against. So I just think that this is a team as a whole offensively started the year very one-dimensional. Leavitt was playing a part of that just because he wasn't playing well, but has really developed into a well-rounded unit and where they can run the ball. But now Sam Leavitt's able to take advantage of defenses trying to stop Cam Scatterbo and able to beat you with his arm. And I think going into this one, listen, Texas is far and away the best defense Arizona State will have seen so far this year. And they are going to need Sam Leavitt to continue playing at that level to give them a shot, because this is not the kind of game where I think Arizona State can try to win it 17-13. I just don't think defensively they'll be able to hold up. I think that they are going to have to score points. And I think Sam Leavitt could surprise some people in this game. I know that a lot of people are looking at this as it's going to be a blowout. The spread is huge. And I definitely think that is very much in play, because when Texas shows up and Texas is at full strength, good luck. But I also think that this is an Arizona State team that's been overlooked a bit too much, who has a real shot to make a game of this.
And boy, they are leaning into that underdog storyline. I mean, that's all you're hearing coming out of them is nobody thinks they have a chance in this game. Sam Leavitt's out there talking about, what an opportunity he has. Cam Scadaboo's talking about getting overlooked when he was recruited, at different schools. They see this as a massive opportunity to spoil this whole tournament, right, that we have as the college football playoff. And I love what you said about Sam Leavitt. I think he's peaking at exactly the right time. And if we just saw Texas against Cade Klubnik, who I would say Cade Klubnik's probably a little bit more mobile, but when you're playing against this Texas defense, you're not going to be able to just block them up and sit in the pocket and go through your progressions. There are going to be times when it breaks down, or there are going to be times when you want to design quarterback rollout to get them on the move and move the pocket so that you don't just sit back there as a sitting duck. And the good news is for Arizona State, Sam Leavitt's able to do that. He's a very mobile quarterback, so he can escape that coverage. And I hope he plays as efficiently as he did most of the season, and even against Arizona State, where it was a very efficient, clean performance. And the thing that was most impressive with me was the other guys that stepped up, not named Cam Scadaboo, because Cam Scadaboo, when they lost Jordan Tyson, we pointed this out in the podcast, Cam Scadaboo was their second leading receiver. So it was like, there's going to be a massive drop-off. And then the others, the guys that are complementary players, stepped up on the big stage and made several big plays. I think they're going to need that again, as well as I think Cam Scadaboo is going to have a good game receiving the football, because it's hard to imagine them lining up and running down Texas' throat. But I do think they're going to figure out ways to put points on the board against this defense.
For this Texas offense, we've seen throughout the course of the last maybe month or so, they've had to deal with a lot of issues along the offensive line when it comes to injury, but they have gotten continued production and performance from their freshman running back, Contravius Wisner. Do you see, Danny, this Texas team being able to lean on the ground game again as a stabilizing factor of the offense?
I think so. I think they will. But I think the best part, and this is one of the things I love about the format that we've got this year with the 10 days or so that we've had between games, the news from Texas on the injury front has been pretty much, really solid. They've getting guys coming back that are going to be ready to go. Maybe that is because they had a few extra days to heal up. But I think you've also found other guys step up. Matthew Golden, since Isaiah Bond has been banged up so much of the season, you've seen him emerge. Remember, the running back room was decimated earlier this season, and you've had Wisner step up in that role as well. So I think Texas, clearly, they always want to run the football. I mean, that's one thing. Most good offenses are always going to be built off the run. But behind that offensive line and some of those holes they opened up against Clemson, you saw how much damage they can do when they're as effective running the ball as they were against them. And that clearly will be a big part of the game plan against one of the smaller defensive fronts they go against, going against prototypically SEC bigger teams throughout the regular season.
It's a really interesting matchup because Texas was banged up on its offensive line in that first round game against Clemson, and there are some questions about who will be back full strength or if they're not. But the one thing we've seen from Texas this year is, as far as the lines of scrimmage are concerned, they're very deep. All the recruiting that Steve Sarkisian and that staff have done in recent years to give themselves depth at the defensive and offensive lines positions is really paying off, because they've had to take guys out like all-American caliber players, and the backups have come in and played just as well. And we saw it last week against Clemson. They were really able to exploit. We've seen it with Clemson's defense all year. When it gets to like stretch plays and outside zone, Clemson has struggled to stop that. And Texas said, okay, well, that's all we're going to run against. We're going to see how it works. And it worked really well for them for the most part. Will we see them be able to do that same thing against Arizona State? You mentioned it, Danny. They're not as big as Clemson, but maybe they're a little more sound. Maybe they don't leave as many open lanes for running backs to exploit, and they can do a better job of at least keeping things in front. But when it comes down to this Texas offense, I mean, the plain and simple truth is, I think Steve Sarkisian is one of the best play callers in college football. I think he's one of the best individual game planners when he looks at his opponent, finding spots to exploit. He figures out ways to do it, and he does an excellent job of doing so. I think Texas will be prepared. I think if they're able to run the ball, they will stick with the run. I think if they're unable to run the ball, they will figure out ways to get the ball moving through the passing game, whether it's with screens or RPOs or whatever they have to do to get it done. I think this is a very good team, and it will come down to just, again, one of their bugaboos all season long. When they get to the red zone, can they finish drives? Last week, they were able to do it against Clemson, which has been a bad red zone defense all season long. And guess who else has been a bad red zone defense all season long? Arizona State. So it's not a great matchup for the Sun Devils in that aspect, but it could be for the Longhorns.
Okay, real fast. We just got a couple minutes here. Just head nods. The prediction is Texas wins, right? Okay. What is?
Yeah.
Ooh. All right, then you first, Tom.
I think it'll be a good game.
Yeah. What do you think an upset looks like? What does it take for Arizona State to win this football game? Okay.
Turnovers and red zone stops. Just if you could force Texas into making some mistakes, maybe a special teams play within a return like we talked about in the last game, getting them some good field position. I think there is a path for Arizona State because, again, I do think their offense is better than they really get credit for nationally looking into this game. And that if they're able to control the clock and keep their defense off the field, they've got a shot.
I think in Arizona State, upset looks like a higher scoring game. I think that's the only way I don't envision a defensive slugfest in Arizona State coming out on top. But the good news is we've talked about it. I think Arizona State does have that capability of putting up points on the board. The other thing is like Quinn Ewers, and I talked about this a lot on our show. Like Ohio State, we saw the best version of them against Tennessee. I don't feel like we've seen that all season long with Texas. If they show up and you feel like they meet their potential, this game could get ugly, but we haven't seen it. And so to Tom's point about the turnovers, Quinn Ewers, a little sloppy with the football, throwing those, to the right, a little bit late, missing inside. He's been inconsistent. There have been some inaccuracies, whether it's because of his oblique, because of his ankle, whatever it is. He's been a little up and down. So I would say a couple mistakes from Texas and a lot of points from Arizona State would be the recipe for an Arizona State win.
And to both y'all's points, Kenny Dillingham don't coach scared. Like this is going to be someone who comes in like throwing flamethrowers. Like, okay, like let's go. Let's put it all out on the table. A higher scoring game, one where, who's willing to go out there and take some risks. Those could be Arizona State's way of closing what is very much a talent advantage. Yeah, Danny.
Before that game got sideways, that was one of the tone setters for that game in the Big 12 championship game. Remember the fourth down? He went for it. It was in his own territory. Came up huge. Teams, like the players, love that. They thrive against that. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he makes more aggressive decisions in this game because why not? Like you're the underdog. Nobody thinks you can be there. Throw it all out there. He's going to throw the kitchen sink at him for sure.
Going to be awesome. Can't wait.
I was just going to say with Kenny, like going back to his time as OC at Florida State, Oregon, and now at Arizona State, he just does a very good job of knowing what his players' strengths are and putting them in position to use it and succeed. And I think that's something you have to look out for in this game.
So fired up for this quarterfinal round. We will be having some instant reactions after the 31st and the first late night. But what if you want to come see us live? Oh, because you can in the very next round. That's right. We are all going to be together. 1, 2, 3, 4 of the Cover 3 for the Cover 3 Tailgate Live in Fort Worth, Texas. That is the night before the Cotton Bowl semifinal. The event will be from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Central Time at Tannehill's Tavern and Music Hall. We want you to be there with us. And if you can't make it, that's okay, because you can always get the Cover 3 podcast. We are live 4 to 5 times a week. Scan the QR code. Watch us live on youtube.com/cover3 or download wherever you get your podcasts.